Imagine this for a moment. It's a crisp morning, November 20th, 1979. First day of a new Islamic century, 1400 AH, and suddenly, news flashes across the globe from Mecca, Islam's holiest site. It's almost unbelievable.
Utterly shocking. Several hundred armed extremists had seized the Grand Mosque.
Right, seized it. Thousands of worshippers trapped inside. It wasn't just a building, it was the heart of Islam.
Exactly. And these weren't just, political rebels. Their leader, Muhammad Abdullah al-Qahtani, made this extraordinary claim.
He said he was the Mahdi, the awaited one.
The promised Islamic Mahdi, yeah. The one prophesied to fill the earth with justice. So this wasn't just politics. It was framed as, the end times starting.
And the Saudi forces, they were stuck. How do you attack your holiest site?
A terrible dilemma. They needed religious approval, a fatwa, before going in. It took nearly 2 weeks.
2 weeks of intense, bloody fighting inside the mosque itself.
Horrific. Over 150 people died in that sacred space before they finally subdued the last militants hiding below ground.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? Deeply unsettling. And this modern event, 1979, it suddenly brought this ancient concept right back to the surface.
The Mahdi, a figure awaited throughout Islamic history.
And al-Qahtani wasn't the first to claim the title, far from it. This has happened across centuries, all over the Muslim world.
And he wasn't claiming to be a messiah either. That's a common Western mix-up, the book we're looking at today points out. Specifically, the Mahdi.
Which brings us to what we're doing today. We're going to get into this fascinating new study, the concept of the Mahdi Among Ahl, al-Sunna. We'll just call it the book.
Yeah, by Suhaib Hasan. And it really digs into the descriptions of the Mahdi in both Sunni and Shia traditions, but with a real focus on the Sunni sources.
So our mission really is to unpack all this, understand the idea, see how it played out historically.
And crucially, figure out what the authentic sources actually say, trying to separate that from maybe political spin or, later additions.
Exactly. Cut through the noise. Because this topic, the Mahdi, it's often surrounded by misinformation or people only seeing one side of it.
Right. So for you listening, this is a chance to get a really solid, concise understanding.
We want to give you the surprising facts, the key distinctions, so you walk away feeling genuinely well-informed about something that's shaped and still shapes so much.
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's set the stage properly. That 1979 Mecca incident, it wasn't just news, it was the spark for this very book.
It really was. When al-Qahtani claimed to be the Mahdi, and again, Mahdi, not Messiah, a point the book stresses against Western misunderstandings, it hit a nerve.
This dramatic takeover of the holiest site.
By someone claiming this ultimate religious role, it directly motivated the author, Suhaib Hasan.
He felt he had to go back to the source.
Exactly. A scholarly urgency. Find the oldest Sunni texts, understand the authentic concept, away from the headlines and, modern interpretations or agendas, get back to the bedrock.
And what's fascinating right away is that both Sunnis and Shias talk about the Mahdi extensively.
They do. Both traditions expect this figure, this divinely guided leader who brings justice. But how they understand him, that's where things really diverge.
Different paths, really. So let's start with the Shia view, specifically the Imamiyya branch, as the book lays it out. For them, he's not just an idea, he's a specific person.
A very particular individual, yes. Muhammad B. al-Hasan al-Askari, born way back in 256 AH, that's 869 CE.
And the crucial part is, they believe he's still alive.
Still alive, in what they call occultation, a state of divine concealment. This isn't just theology, it shapes their whole view of leadership.
So he's hidden, waiting.
Right, and his reappearance is a divine secret. Only Allah knows when. It'll happen when the world is some sort of at its worst point of injustice.
Which is quite different from the Sunni idea, where he hasn't been born yet.
Very different. And the Shia believe when he does reappear, he'll establish justice globally, achieve what even prophets and saints couldn't fully manage before because of, obstacles.
A total transformation.
A complete reset. And here's a really interesting detail the book flags up. He's expected to bring out the genuine copy of the Quran.
The genuine copy.
One supposedly written by Ali himself, seen as the perfect, uncorrupted version.
Wow. Okay, that's a very specific, very lineage-focused view, tied to this idea of occultation.
Deeply tied. Now, in contrast, the book we're discussing focuses mainly on the Sunni concept.
Using their hadith sources.
Exactly. And the author's main goal is to pin down the Mahdi's characteristics within that Sunni framework. But crucially, by carefully sorting the authentic hadith from the weak or even fabricated ones.
And that critical sifting process, that's the foundation for everything else.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Which leads us to something fundamental you need to grasp to follow this: hadith criticism.
Right. You can't really understand the Sunni perspective without understanding how they verify these reports.
It's central, not just to this book, but to all of Sunni scholarship, really. A hadith, just to clarify for everyone, is basically a record. Prophet Muhammad's sayings, actions, approvals.
And it has two parts, right? The text itself.
The content, and then the isnad.
The chain of reporters. Who heard it from whom all the way back.
Precisely. And that chain is everything. Think of it like proving an old document is real. The story, the matan, might sound amazing.
But you need proof it's authentic. The chain of custody, the isnad.
Exactly. Who passed it down? Were they reliable? It's incredibly meticulous. There's a great quote in the book from Abdullah B. al-Mubarak, a scholar from way back, died 181 AH.
What did he say?
He said, "The isnad is part of the religion. Had it not been for the isnad, whoever wished to would have said whatever he liked."
Powerful. It basically stops people from just making things up and calling it religion.
That's the core idea. Verification is fundamental. And this need led to whole fields of study.
Like Mustalah al-Hadith?
The science of hadith, yeah. A whole methodology for checking authenticity. And Riyal al-Hadith.
Which studies the reporters themselves.
Meticulously. Biographies, trustworthiness, memory, everything. They built this incredibly rigorous system to ensure reliability. It's quite unique, the scale of it.
So, knowing that framework, this deep scrutiny, how does Suhaib Hasan, the author, actually tackle this in the book? It started as his PhD thesis, right, from Birmingham back in '91.
That's right, which gives it that real academic rigor. And he actually thanks people in the acknowledgments, Ali Hassan, Tahir Noor, Azhar Majothi.
For helping get it from a dusty thesis into a published book.
Exactly, making it widely available. So clearly a labor of love, driven by this need to clarify the Mahdi concept.
And his sources, where did he primarily draw from?
Okay, this is key. A major source is a very early work, Kitab al-Fitan by Nu'aym B. Hamid. He died in 228 AH, so early 9th century CE.
Kitab al-Fitan, Fitan meaning trials and tribulations.
Right, often linked to the end times and the Mahdi's appearance. This book is huge, around 350 sayings just on the Mahdi.
And it wasn't widely available before.
Mostly just in manuscript form. So Hassan's work in analyzing it, bringing it to light, is pretty groundbreaking. He selected 122 sayings from it to study.
Not just accepting them all, but analyzing them.
Critically analyzing, yeah. Trying to sort the authentic from the unreliable. And then he also uses the big established collections. Ahmad, Hanbal, Ibn Majah, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi.
The giants of Hadith collection from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AH.
Exactly. So he's drawing on both very early, less known material and the widely accepted canonical works.
And the book itself, how is it structured? You mentioned analysis.
Right. It's basically in two parts. First, you get English translations of the selected hadith, mainly about these fitan, the trials.
Okay.
Then the second part, which is really the engine of the whole study, is this detailed analysis, focusing laser-like on the isnad, the chain of reporters for each hadith.
That's how he determines authenticity.
That's the method. Which brings us to something absolutely crucial for you to understand this study, or really any discussion about hadith, the levels of authenticity.
The ranking system.
Exactly. How scholars grade these narrations. It's the bedrock of the whole system.
Okay, let's break that down. The top tier, the gold standard, is sahih, sound.
Yeah.
What does it take to get that label?
Okay, so he's tough. Imam Shafi, a massive figure in Islamic law, laid out really strict rules. Think of it like layers of security checks.
So you have one.
Every single reporter in the chain. Unimpeachable, trustworthy in religion, known for truthfulness, no weird beliefs.
Okay, next.
Understanding. They can't just be parrots. They need to grasp the meaning, know how a tiny word change could affect everything. Ideally, they report word for word.
Verbatim. Makes sense. What else?
Memory or records. Excellent memory of reporting verbally or super careful preservation of their written notes or books. No sloppiness allowed.
Right.
Then consistency. Their version has to generally agree with what other reliable reporters transmitted. No major contradictions.
Outliers.
And no taddlies. That's like hiding a weak link in the chain to make it look stronger. Deceptive.
Okay.
And obviously, the content can't clash with definitely known, more reliable sources or core principles. And the chain itself. Absolutely unbroken. All the way back to the prophet or the companion. Every link has to meet these standards.
Wow. That is incredibly thorough. It explains why Sahih Hadith carries so much weight.
Absolutely. It's the highest level of confidence.
So what's the next level down, Hassan? Agreeable or good? How does that differ?
Hasan is still strong, still generally accepted for use, but it just doesn't quite meet that Sahih perfection. Maybe a slight weakness somewhere.
Like what kind of weakness?
Okay, a Hasan Hadith can't be shad, meaning it can't contradict a stronger narration, and it can't have any severely criticized reporter in the chain.
Okay.
But the key difference often is maybe one of the reporters is known for truthfulness, generally reliable, but perhaps their memory isn't quite top tier like a Sahih reporter. Or maybe there's a very minor uncertainty about a link.
But it's not a fatal flaw.
Exactly. And crucially, Hasan Hadith usually have support. They're reported through more than one chain. These multiple routes help compensate for any slight minor weakness in one chain. The book puts it well. It excels the da'if, but nevertheless does not reach the standard of a Sahih Hadith.
Good, but not perfect. Like reporters Buzz B. Hakam or Amr B. Shu'aib mentioned in the book.
Precisely. Their narrations might often fall into this Hasan category. Still valuable, still usable, just not quite the pinnacle.
Okay, then we get to daif, weak. This is where real problems start showing up.
Yeah, da'if means it fails to reach even the Hasan standard. There's a definite defect, or maybe multiple defects, compromising its reliability. Usually falls into two buckets.
Bucket number one.
A break in the chain. The isnad is discontinuous, like a mursal hadith.
Mursal.
That's where a successor, someone from the generation after the Prophet's companions, narrates directly from the Prophet, but skips mentioning the companion they heard it from. There's a missing link right at the top.
Ah, okay. Like hearing something secondhand, but presenting it as firsthand.
Kinda, yeah. Or munkadi. That's a ruck anywhere else in the chain, a missing person somewhere in the middle. That weakens it.
And the second reason for being daif.
Problems with a reporter. Their character is disparaged, as the scholars put it.
Meaning?
Could be anything from known lying, making excessive mistakes, being involved in religious innovations, bid'ah, or even just being unknown or ambiguous. You can't verify the reliability.
And the more problems, the weaker it gets.
Exactly. It slides down the scale. More breaks, more unreliable reporters.
Yeah.
It gets progressively weaker.
Until you hit the absolute bottom, Madu. Fabricated, spurious. This is where it gets kind of alarming, right? People actually making things up.
It is alarming, yes.
Yeah.
And it shows precisely why hadith criticism was so necessary. Madhu means completely rejected, fake.
How do they spot a fake?
Well, the text itself might blatantly contradict known facts or establish Islamic principles. Or, more definitively, the chain includes a known, proven liar.
And the book gives examples of these liars.
Some shocking ones. There was a guy, Muhammad B. Saeed al-Mazlub, notorious. He apparently said, "It is not wrong to fabricate an isnad for a sound statement."
Wait, so he thought it was okay to invent a chain of reporters if he liked the message.
That seems to be the twisted logic. The ends justify the means. Even worse is Abd al-Karim Abu al-Auja. He was actually executed for this.
Executed?
Yes, he admitted it. Admitted to fabricating 4,000 hadith, making lawful things forbidden and vice versa. Just pure corruption.
4,000? That's staggering. It shows the scale of the potential problem they were fighting.
It really does. And fakes can also be spotted by external evidence, like dates not adding up. The book mentions Caliph Umar rejecting a document from some Jews in Khaybar.
Why?
The document supposedly proved they could stay, signed by the Prophet. But the witness is listed. One died years before the event it referred to, and another only became Muslim years after. Clumsy forgery.
The timeline was impossible.
Exactly. The book lists reasons people fabricated hadith, political fights, sectarianism, storytellers trying to spice things up, personal bias, even just turning proverbs into prophetic sayings. It was a real issue, which makes the achievement of sifting through it all even more impressive.
Okay, so after all that incredibly meticulous sifting, filtering through Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, and rejecting the Mahdi, what's the bottom line? What is the authentic description of the Mahdi that emerges from the book's analysis of genuine Sunni Hadith? This is really the core, right? The reliable picture.
This is the heart of it, yeah. And it's surprisingly straightforward compared to some of the wilder stories out there.
Yeah.
Based on the book's analysis, and remember, they only found 22 authentic narrations relevant to his description out of 146 they looked at closely.
Only 22 deemed reliable enough. Wow, okay.
Yeah. 16 marfu from the Prophet, 3 maku from a companion, 3 maktu from a successor. So from these reliable bits, here's the picture.
First off, his coming is certain.
Absolutely certain. The sources are clear. He will appear. Even if there's only one day left of this world, Allah will prolong that day so he can come and do his work. It's a definite future event.
And his identity, name, family.
Very specific. His name will be Muhammad, son of Abdullah, just like the prophet and his father.
Same names. Okay.
And he'll be from the prophet's household, the al-Bayt. Specifically, a descendant of Hassan, who is the son of Fatima, the prophet's daughter.
From the Hassanid line, not the Husainid line, which is important in Shi'ism.
That's a key distinction in the Sunni sources. Yes, descended from Hassan.
What about how he becomes the Mahdi? Is it a long process?
Apparently not. The authentic hadiths say Allah will prepare him in a single night.
One night.
Yeah. Suggests a sudden divine preparation or empowerment. Not years of study or campaigning, but boom, he's ready.
Interesting. Any physical description?
Succinct, but distinctive. A wide forehead.
Signifying wisdom, perhaps?
Possibly. And an aquiline nose, meaning somewhat hooked or prominent. Recognizable features.
And his time, his reign. What will it be like?
A golden age, essentially. Marked by two things. Unbelievable abundance and perfect justice.
Abundance of what?
Wealth. Just immense wealth. He'll distribute it freely without even counting it.
Wow.
And justice. He will fill the earth with equity and justice, just as it had been filled with tyranny and oppression before him. A complete turnaround. The sources say the heavens will rain generously, the earth will produce abundantly. Things will be so good. Hadith says the living souls will envy the dead.
They'll wish they were alive to see it.
Exactly. A time of unparalleled peace and prosperity.
Is there any key event mentioned that marks his time?
Yes, a hugely significant one. Jesus, son of Mary Esa ibn Maryam, will descend, and he will pray behind the Mahdi.
Jesus praying behind the Mahdi.
Yes. This underscores the Mahdi's leadership role at that crucial time and aligns these two major figures in Islamic eschatology.
And how long does this era last?
The authentic reports say 7 or 9 years. That's the duration of his rule as the Mahdi.
7 or 9 years. And his age. Any indication?
There's one Malk Hadith from Kab al-Abar, a respected early figure whose report the book deems authentic on this point. It suggests the Mahdi will be around 51 years old when he appears.
51. Okay. So that's the picture from the authentic sources. Certainty of coming, specific name and lineage from Hassan, divine preparation, wide forehead, aquiline nose, incredible justice and wealth, Jesus praying behind him, ruling for 7 or 9 years, appearing around age 51.
That's the distilled essence, according to the book's findings. And what's really striking is how relatively simple and undramatic it is compared to centuries of folklore and embellishment.
Right. It gives you, the listener, a solid baseline, a way to measure other claims and stories you might hear. Is it consistent with this authentic core, or is it adding layers?
Exactly. It empowers you to distinguish the rigorously verified tradition from, well, everything else.
And everything else certainly includes a lot of historical figures who actually claim to be the Mahdi. This authentic description we just outlined really contrasts with the sheer number of claimants throughout history.
Absolutely. Or people who didn't claim it themselves, but their followers insisted they were the Mahdi. The book provides a whole chronology.
Which really shows how powerful and attractive this idea has been, this longing for justice, for that divinely guided leader. It pops up again and again.
It really does. You see genuine belief, but also, frankly, political opportunism using the title. Let's look at some key examples the book highlights. They're quite revealing.
Okay, who's first? Someone early on.
Very early. Salih b. Tarif al-Barghawati died 174 AH, so late 8th century. He moved from Spain to Morocco.
And he claimed to be the Mahdi.
Not just the Mahdi, he claimed to be a prophet too, brought a new law, the whole deal. And incredibly, he established a rule in North Africa that lasted almost 50 years.
Wow. Shows how early these claims started and how politically potent they could be.
Definitely. Then there's a really fascinating case, much more tied into the big dynastic struggles. Muhammad b. Abdullah b. Hassan b. Ali, known as An-Nafs al-Zakiyah, the purified soul. He died around 145 AH 762 CE. Right. He was a direct descendant of Hassan, just like the authentic hadith specify for the Mahdi. And his father actively pushed him to claim the title.
As a challenge to the ruling Abbasids.
Exactly. A legitimate alternative from the Prophet's family. But interestingly, the famous Shia Imam Jafar al-Sadiq denounced the claim, said the real Mahdi wasn't coming yet.
And how did the Abbasid ruler react?
Al-Mansur.
This is where it gets really cynical. Al-Mansur saw the threat. So what did he do? He nicknamed his own son al-Mahdi.
He co-opted the title.
Completely. The book notes he even admitted privately it was just politics, a way to neutralize the threat from the elites. Al-Nafs al-Zakiyah's revolt was crushed, but it shows the political manipulation already happening.
You really see the concept getting tangled up in power politics right away. Who's next?
How about Ubaydullah al-Mahdi? Died 322 AH 933 CE. He wasn't just a claimant, he founded a dynasty.
The Fatimids?
That's them, yeah. The Ubaydids, technically. A massive Ismaili Shia empire ruling from North Africa into Egypt and beyond for over 250 years, all based on his claim to be the Mahdi. So the title could found empires, literally.
In this case, absolutely. Shows his power across different sects, too.
Okay, moving closer to our time.
Let's jump to the 19th century. Muhammad Ahmad al-Mahdi al-Sudani. Died 1885.
The Mahdi of Sudan, very famous.
Very. Claimed Mahdiya in 1881. Said he was sent to reform Islam, liberate Sudan. And his message resonated powerfully.
He had huge popular support.
Massive. And military success. He defeated Egyptian and British forces, established a modest state. His forces took Khartoum.
And killed General Gordon, a huge event in British imperial history.
Exactly. Shows the concept could fuel major anti-colonial, religiously inspired movements with real military clout.
Then there's a more complex, maybe controversial figure, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani. Died in 1908.
Right, founder of the Ahmadiyya movement. His claims were, well, multiple. First the Mujaddid, renewer, then the Mahdi, then the promised Messiah, then even a type of prophet.
And the book points out a contradiction in his claims.
A really interesting one. He apparently rejected the authenticity of many traditional hadith about the Mahdi's coming.
Okay.
Yet he insisted he was the Mahdi, often using those same hadith, just interpreting them allegorically or non-literally.
So dismissing the source while claiming the title derived from it.
It highlights the theological gymnastics that can happen. Self-serving interpretations, internal inconsistencies. It gets complicated.
And finally, leaping back to where we started.
Muhammad B. Abdullah al-Qahtani died 1979, the leader of the Mecca siege.
Convinced he was the one.
Deeply convinced. Based on dreams and that powerful coincidence of his name and his father's name matching the prophets. It just shows the idea isn't ancient history. It's alive, potent, and can still inspire dramatic, world-shaking events today.
So those are people who claim the title. But you mentioned others who didn't claim it, but people believed they were the Mahdi.
Right, an important distinction. Shows how the idea itself was just floating in the air, ready to be attached to figures people admired or hoped in.
Like who?
Even Ali b. Abi Talib, the prophet's son-in-law, died 40 AH. Some extremists, followers of Abdullah b. Saba apparently, claimed he was God or the Mahdi.
And Ali rejected this.
Violently, according to the book, reportedly had some burned for blasphemy. Shows how mainstream Islam rejected these extreme elevations early on.
Even Muawiyah, founder of the Umayyad dynasty.
Surprisingly, yes. Some very early scholars, Qatada, Mujahid, Abu Ishaq al-Subu'i, are reported to have referred to Muawiyah as a Mahdi, meaning maybe just rightly guided in a general sense. Shows the term might have been used more broadly initially.
Interesting. What about Muhammad b al-Hanafiya, another son of Ali? Died 81 AH.
His case is fascinating. After Hussein's martyrdom, a revolutionary named Mukhtar al-Thaqafi launched a movement for revenge.
And he used Muhammad b al-Hanafiya's name.
Exactly. Promoted him as the Mahdi, the hidden imam who would bring justice. But the book stresses Muhammad b al-Hanafiya himself never endorsed Mukhtar or the claim.
So his name was exploited for political ends.
A classic example. Shows the symbolic power of the name and lineage.
Then there's Muhammad b al-Hasan al-Askar,
the 12th imam for the Imamiyya Shia, born 256 AH. As we said, he's the Mahdi for them, currently in occultation. So he didn't claim it in a conventional sense because he's hidden.
But believed by millions to be the Mahdi.
Absolutely.
And one more, Muhammad al-Sanusi of Libya. Died 1859.
Founder of the Sunni order and state. Some of his followers believed he was the Mahdi, saw those qualities in him, even if he didn't make the explicit claim himself. Again, showing how people projected the hope onto influential leaders.
Looking at all these examples, claimants, and those believed to be Mahdi, it really paints a picture.
It does. This deep, persistent human yearning for justice, for an end to oppression, for that perfect, divinely guided leader. The Mahdi concept taps right into that.
And that yearning gets interpreted, reinterpreted, sometimes manipulated across totally different times and places. A really complex history.
But this complex history, and especially the hadith that underpin the concept, haven't gone without challenge. There's been significant scholarly debate, particularly from historians looking at it with a skeptical eye.
Right. scholars suggesting maybe these hadith aren't ancient prophecies, but more like reflections of the politics of their time.
Exactly. Figures like D.S. Margolieff, a British scholar, and Wilfred Madelung, a German historian in the book, discusses their views. They argued that many Mahdi hadiths seem to mirror events and ambitions, especially during the Umayyad and Abbasid periods.
What was their core argument?
That the term Mahdi itself might have emerged later, and all the contradictory details you find in different narrations, different genealogies, different descriptions, they saw that as evidence of fabrication. Different groups basically inventing hadith to support their own candidate or political faction.
So Margolieff questioned if the term Mahdi was even used early on.
Yeah, he doubted its appearance in some early letters, suggesting later invention. Madelung went further, attributing specific hadith to specific political contexts, like the one about the Mahdi being prepared in a single night.
The one we said was authentic earlier.
Yes. Madelung suggested that was made up by supporters of the Alids, the family of Ali, to boost their claims to sudden, divinely backed leadership. They saw these hadith as products of human history, not divine revelation.
Okay, so that's the skeptical historical take. How does the book, The Concept of the Mahdi, respond? It doesn't just ignore history, but it pushes back.
It pushes back strongly while still acknowledging context matters.
Yeah.
Its main defense is the rigor of hadith criticism itself, arguing it's a more reliable tool than just looking at historical context alone.
How does it counter the idea that the term Mahdi is late?
By pointing to hadith where the Prophet himself uses the term. And these hadith have solid chains, isnads, going back to the first couple of centuries AH, before a lot of the later political turmoil.
So the verifiable chains suggest the term was early.
That's the argument. The existence of these early, reliable transmissions points to an earlier origin for the concept itself, not just a later political invention.
And what about the fact that some hadith were clearly fabricated or weak? Does that discredit the whole idea?
No, and the book makes a great analogy here. It compares it to the news reports during the Romanian Revolution in 1989.
How so?
Well, initial reports on casualties were all over the place, wildly inflated sometimes. But the fact that some reports were wrong didn't mean the revolution itself didn't happen or that nobody died. It just meant you had to critically examine each report to find the truth.
So finding some fake Mahdi hadith doesn't mean they're all fake.
Precisely. You can't just throw everything out. You have to apply the critical methodology, hadith criticism, to each one individually. Blanket dismissal isn't scholarly.
Which leads to the critique of relying only on historical context.
Right. The book argues historical context is vital for understanding how ideas spread or get interpreted, maybe even why some fakes were made. But it's not enough on its own to declare a specific hadith authentic or fabricated.
You need the is-not analysis.
You need the internal check.
Yeah.
The chain, the reporters, the text itself. That's the primary tool according to hadith methodology, and the book argues it's superior to just saying this sounds like it fits that political situation.
Can we look at a specific example of how the book refutes a historical critique? That Salama hadith about an army sinking in the desert.
Yes, that's a perfect case study. Madelung saw it as clear propaganda for Abdullah b al-Zubayr during the siege of Mecca around 64 AH. He argued it was invented to boost morale, especially since the army besieging them didn't sink as the prophecies seemed to predict.
So Madelung links it directly to that event.
Yes, but the book digs into the isnads, and it finds chains for this hadith going back through people like Aisha and Hafsa, wives of the Prophet.
Who died before Ibn al-Zubayr's revolt in that siege.
Exactly. Which means the hadith must have existed before the event Madelung linked it to. It couldn't have been fabricated for that specific situation.
The timeline doesn't work for Madelung's theory.
Right. The isnad analysis trumps the circumstantial historical argument here. It also suggests a later reporter denying the prophecy applied to Yazid's army was just stating a fact it didn't happen that way, not trying to cover for a failed prophecy. It's a great example of isnad clarifying history.
What about Bukhari not including Mahdi hadith in his famous Sahih collection? Some took that as significant.
The book addresses that too. It simply points out that Bukhari himself said he didn't include every authentic hadith he knew. His collection was selective.
It wasn't meant to be exhaustive.
No. And plenty of other equally respected collectors did include authentic Mahdi hadith Muslim, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi. So Bukhari's omission doesn't really prove anything about the concept's validity.
Okay. And that other tricky hadith. The Mahdi is none but Isa bi Maryam, Jesus. It seems like a direct contradiction.
The book tackles this head-on using Hadith criticism. It identifies a known unreliable reporter in the chain for that specific narration.
So the Hadith itself is classified as weak, Daif.
Exactly. Because the chain is faulty, the narration isn't considered reliable enough to base doctrine on or to contradict the other, stronger Hadith about a distinct Mahdi figure. Problem solved through critical analysis of the source.
Although the book does acknowledge that many inauthentic narrations do have contradictions about his lineage, age, etc.
Oh, absolutely. It points out disagreements in weak or fabricated reports. Is he from Hassan or Hussein? From Abbas? How old is he? Where will he conquer? The unreliable stuff is messy. And it notes scholars have tried to reconcile these contradictions over centuries.
But it agrees with Madlong on one point, about the elaborate paraphernalia.
Yes, there's a point of convergence there. The book agrees that a lot of the more detailed or fantastical elements often associated with the Mahdi-specific battles, elaborate signs, exact sequences of events, likely do reflect the political hopes and fears and imaginations of the Umayyad and Abbasid periods.
So the extra details might be historically influenced.
But that doesn't negate the core concept itself, which the book argues is established by the authentic Hadith. It's about separating that original authentic core from later embellishments or political overlays.
So wrapping things up now, we've covered a lot of ground today, from that really dramatic scene in Mecca back in '79.
Which really kicked off this whole line of inquiry for the author.
Through the complex, fascinating world of Hadith criticism, Sunni versus Shia views, historical claims, skeptical challenges,
and how the book meticulously works through it all, trying to find that authentic core. It's been quite a journey through the sources.
And hopefully for you listening, it's provided the tools to see why scholars accept certain details about the Mahdi and reject others. It's not arbitrary.
Not at all. There's a rigorous method behind it. The key takeaways seem clear. Yes, the Mahdi concept is definitely rooted in Islamic tradition, backed by authentic narrations from the Prophet. But many of the details, the interpretations, the historical claims surrounding him, those have often been shaped by politics, by debates, sometimes by outright fabrication.
So now you hopefully have a clearer, more fact-based understanding, something beyond just the myths or the headlines,
Right.
based on what the rigorous scholarship, as presented in the book, actually shows.
Right. It allows you to engage with the idea from a more informed place.
And the Mahdi, the guided one, he clearly remains this powerful figure of hope for many Muslims, this expectation.
A profound hope. And the endurance of that idea, maybe it tells us less about the specific details and more about that deep human longing for justice, for equity, for righteous leadership.
A longing that finds expression in different ways, sometimes controversial ways, throughout history.
Exactly.
So as we finish, maybe something to think about is this. What does that enduring anticipation, that persistent hope for a leader who will finally end injustice, what does that tell us about our own collective dreams for a better world? That timeless desire for peace and fairness.
A powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this exploration.